Mr. President, we are on the floor here this afternoon with the issue before us of GMO foods, genetically modified organisms. I don't want to talk about GMO foods in that space. I want to talk about a more specific genetically engineered species. I would like to speak this afternoon about genetically engineered salmon. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is separate from this larger GMO debate that we've been engaged on the floor here. Genetically engineered animals are not crops. They're not something that grows in a field and stays stationary. A genetically engineered salmon is something that swims. It moves around. It is something entirely new. It is a new species designed specifically for human consumption. This is the first time that the FDA has ever signed off on a genetically engineered new species designed for human consumption. First time. I happen to think that the FDA sign-off was wrong. And I'm going to continue to object to that because this new species that potentially will be introduced into our markets, into our homes, and quite possibly into our ecosystems, contrary to what any environmental assessment may claim. This is new, this is unprecedented. When we talk about, again, a genetically engineered salmon, we have dubbed it a Frankenfish in Alaska because it is splicing DNA from one animal, an ocean pout, with DNA from another fish, a farmed fish, and inserting that into a Chinook salmon. So we're doing a little bit of a science experiment here that concerns many of us. Growing up in the state of Alaska, I know fish. I know the significance of a strong, healthy fisheries. It's our number one employer throughout the state of Alaska. Not only do we look to the strength of our fisheries for strong economies and good jobs, it's critical, it's integral to those who live a subsistence lifestyle. It is so much a part of who we are as Alaskans. Sometimes you look at it and say Alaskans identify themselves with their salmon. Right now, people in Alaska are not necessarily talking about what's going on here in Washington, D.C. They're wondering when the next run of kings is coming in. They're wondering what's happening up on the Yukon and the Kuskokwim with the runs up there. When's the red run going to come in full tilt? When's the dip netting going to be starting? It's all about our fish. Well, we have been assured that if these genetically engineered salmon should be allowed out onto the market, that this production moves forward, that you don't need to worry, Alaska, about any escapement because we're going to make sure that these guys don't get loose. Nice promise, but we know in this state that fish can get out of the pens. They escape from hatcheries. They can be accidentally released from where fish are grown. And so we take very seriously the issues that present themselves with, again, the introduction of a new species that has the potential to wreak havoc, to do harm to our wild natural stocks. And again, whether it's escapement or the promise that don't worry, these fish are going to be sterile, you're not ever going to have to worry about them interbreeding, breeding with your wild stocks, you're going to be safe, Alaska. You're going to be okay, Alaska. Well, the folks that I represent back home look at this and say, no, we don't believe that we have the assurances, we don't believe that we have the certainty, we don't believe that we have the standards that are necessary to provide for the protection of our wild stocks. So I have made clear throughout the larger debate on GMOs that I have opposed this bill because contained within this broader debate of GMOs, we do nothing to make it clear that if genetically engineered salmon is to go forward as the FDA has said that it will, that there needs to be clear and unequivocal labeling of this GE salmon. So contained within this broader bill, we do not have the clear requirement for labeling of GE salmon while also preempting Alaska's labeling law. So what we've been told is, well, don't worry. If these genetically engineered salmon are out on the market, those who are marketing these salmon can voluntarily label them. Well, let me ask you, who do you think is really going to voluntarily place a label on something that says, this is not the real thing? This is not your wild Alaska salmon. This is a genetically engineered species here. You know, the reality is we will not see the labeling that I, as an Alaskan who is putting fish on the dinner table for my family, that I would require, that I would want. So we've been trying to work through this with the chairman of the committee and the ranking member, trying to provide for what we believe are very sensible, reasonable fixes, and yet we are at that place where those accommodations have simply not been made. But let me assure you, Mr. President, Alaskans are very, very unified on this issue. We will not accept that GE salmon or this frankenfish be sold to us without clear labeling. And again, I, for one, am not going to feed my boys this fish. And I use that term lightly because I'm looking at it, it's like, this is not even like a fish. This is not even like a fish. You're taking DNA from an ocean pout. What's an ocean pout? It's an eel. I usually am up here with a big picture of an ugly eel. I figure you might be tired of looking at that picture by now, but apparently it's not getting through to people. This is not viewed, when we talk about frankenfish, this is no joke to Alaskans. It poses a serious threat to the livelihoods of our fishermen, and that's not something that I'm willing to take a risk, that I'm willing to take a gamble on. Our fisheries in the state of Alaska are world-renowned for their high quality and their sustainability. The Alaska seafood industry supports more than 63,000 direct jobs, contributes over $4.6 billion to our state's economy. Nearly 1 in 7 Alaskans are employed in our commercial seafood industry. It's a major part of the seafood economy, and commercial fishermen around the state harvested more than 265 million salmon this past year, including the wild Chinook salmon, sockeye, coho, chums, pinks. It's all coming on right here, right now. I was up in Naknek on Friday. Everyone's waiting, just waiting for the sockeye to hit. It is an incredibly important part of our state's economy. But it's more than just the economic benefit, the dollars that come to our state, the jobs that's created. It's the good, healthy stuff. Wild Alaska salmon has tremendous health benefits. It's a lean protein source of omega-3s, B6, B12, niacin. It's just good stuff. It's naturally good stuff. And it's so good that there are over 1.5 million people who wrote into the FDA who said, we oppose this genetically engineered salmon. And they weighed in. What did FDA do? Basically went the other way, weren't listening. But many of the grocery stores that we frequent have said, you know what? If you are going to allow this out here, we are not going to sell this in our stores. They want to know that there's going to be a label on it. They want to know that they can tell their customers, this is wild Alaska sustainable or the real thing, and this is not. And a voluntary label, again, doesn't cut it. So you have Safeway, Kroger, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, Targets. They've all announced that they're not going to sell it. And despite this immense opposition, in November of last year, the FDA approved Aqua Bounty Technologies' application for its GE Aqua Advantage salmon. So again, I say salmon or fish even in quotation marks, because what we're doing is we're taking a transgenic Atlantic salmon egg, which has genes, again, from this ocean pout, this eel, combine it with the genes of a Chinook. And the egg is meant to produce a fish that grows to full size in twice the time as a normal Atlantic salmon. So again, you're just kind of ramping this thing up on steroids, if you will, to cause it to grow twice as fast. So these eggs, under the FDA application, will be produced in Canada, so it's not like you're getting any American jobs there. And then the smolt, although I don't even really want to use the term smolt because only part of this fish is real salmon. But they're then going to ship this to Panama, where they'll be raised in pens. Again, no U.S. jobs there. But again, the FDA made no mandatory labeling requirement. Instead, they make it voluntary. And then this bill that we have in front of us, the larger GMO bill, does not create a clear labeling mandate either. And that's the concern that I have here. That's why I have fought to secure mandatory labeling requirement both before the approval of Aqua Bounty's application and since its approval. So we've been making good headway on this issue over the time that I've been here in Washington. But unfortunately, the bill that we have in front of us today will wipe that work out instead of using the legislative tools that we have at our disposal to effectively and precisely amend this legislation in order to address the issue of GE salmon. So I've offered up an amendment. It's been sponsored with Senator Sullivan, Senator Cantwell, Murray, and Merkley. And what it would do is require the FDA to create a new market name for GE salmon in order to remedy this flaw in the current bill. So in other words, give the certainty to the consumer. If you're shopping in your grocery store, you will know whether or not what you want to buy for your family is the real thing or whether it is a genetically engineered fish. So the amendment is essentially the same language that was adopted by voice vote, during the agriculture appropriations markup earlier this year. It's substantially similar to language that was adopted by voice in each of the previous 2 years. So we've had this before us, we've seen it, you've seen it, and yet it's not included right now. But for 3 years running, the Appropriations Committee has approved the labeling of GE salmon without debate. So I'm sitting here thinking that this amendment shouldn't be very controversial here, but for some reason it apparently is. Apparently it's caused all kinds of issues. I do not see why. So I have offered multiple sensible solutions over the course of several months while this bill was working its way through the process. And I'm here today to again push for consideration of what I believe is truly sensible, truly reasonable. It has been incorporated and adopted before. It makes sense for a host of different reasons, but certainly for the people of Alaska. So I am here today as we talk about the broader GMO debate, making sure that colleagues understand that my opposition here is to anything that would mistakenly allow genetically engineered salmon into anyone's homes and have it be mislabeled as salmon. So I will continue to demand that the voices of Alaskans and those who care deeply about this, that these voices are heard. With that, Mr. President, I see that other colleagues have joined, and I thank you for your attention to this matter, and I yield the floor.